Okay, is it now you can see the slideshow? So the first question we asked was kind of what's your opinion of Emma, overall positive, overall negative. Almost everyone did overall positive for both Fanny and Emma. And what was kind of interesting, there were some people who were negative about Emma and some people who were negative about Fanny, but only one person was negative about both of them. So that's our first question. And we had about 46 people register, but not everyone responded to the questions. And then again, sort of the same, almost the same percentage, but not the same people who have a negative overall opinion of Fanny. And then this is, I really find this question fascinating. Who's your favorite Jane Austen heroine? So number one was Elizabeth Bennet. Number two was Anne Elliot. Number three was Eleanor Dashwood, which, so Eleanor Dashwood kind of pulled ahead at the very end, because before Emma had about 15%, and then we got a bunch of votes for Eleanor. And then Fanny is the one in purple. So I think she had about 7%. Catherine Morland has a couple of votes, and Marianne Dashwood only has one vote. So the point I want to make about this is everyone has a favorite. And so some of the people, you know, if you don't like Emma Woodhouse, she's still probably the favorite of someone here. So we want to be extra nice when we talk about the questions and kind of talk about the heroines and not be too mean. And then the next question, who's your least favorite Jane Austen heroine, even if you still like her? Of course, no one said Elizabeth Bennet was their least favorite. The highest person was Fanny. Second was Marianne. Third was Catherine Morland, and then Emma Woodhouse, which makes me sad. But anyway, I'll just let you know who my favorite is. So Anne Elliot only had a few people that didn't like her, or you know, had her as the least favorite, and then Eleanor Dashwood had a couple. So anyway, so I thought that was kind of interesting, and kind of like an interesting context for thinking about the discussion. So we did have a bunch of discussion questions that I think almost everyone downloaded the discussion questions and downloaded the 2 articles that we put up there. I'll put them as reference. So now we're going to just open the floor and see what people's thoughts are. And it usually seems like we have a pretty good balance. Yeah, Kirk?
So I found it interesting. You said, if I heard it correctly, there's only one person who disliked both Emma and Fanny.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because in my other Austen group, someone that I used to respect a lot went off on Fanny several years ago. Okay, fine. Although she's an assistant principal, so she deals with troubled kids anyways. So why don't you like Fanny? But then when we got to Emma last year, she went off on Emma too. My respect meter. Yeah. How can you dislike both? I mean, apologies to anyone who hear all the dislikes, but she went to that word that I can't pronounce. It begins with V, and she was nasty too. It was amazing. Thank you.
Well, it's I think that kind of gets to the question that Elaine Vander asks about, you know, like, do we expect that we're going to like the hero or heroine of a story, and you know, what happens if we don't like them?
So I think I brought this up in our last discussion about Lady Susan being a really interesting character for that, because she is genuinely dislikable, but somehow, even though she's evil and horrible, you're still rooting for her, and it doesn't make any sense. But about Fanny, I read something and I cannot remember who said it, but they said, when we dislike Fanny and we underestimate her, we are falling for, this is Jane Austen's plan, we are seeing her as the Bertrams see her. And that's how she's presented to us, and that, like, Jane Austen's got one over on us. We're not seeing Fanny for how great she really is.
Yeah.
Um,
You're calling
I had
someone
a-
Mariah for not liking her. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
I do a novel to classic movie series, and recently we did the Jane Austen novels, and I had a group who, a number of the women in the group did not like Fanny because they felt like she was a wimp. To make, long story short, that's what they felt. But I just didn't see how she could be anything else given the situation that she was in. You don't have any money, you can be thrown out of your ear in a minute. And she had grown up in that situation. And so I just didn't see, I don't know, I didn't have a problem with that, but they seemed to think that she didn't stand up for herself.
It seems that a lot of critics about Fanny are from people who are living in the 21st century and not the 19th century.
Yeah.
And so with that viewpoint, Fanny seems to be a bit subdued, but
Why doesn't she stand up for herself? Yeah.
Well, she's not a 21st century woman. She's not a feminist by any means, you could say, So I think it has to do with a 200-year difference. Her
And
demeanor, her character.
It's not like a woman in that era could get mad and walk out and get a job, because as Jane Austen points out, really the only jobs for women were those women that ran schools for girls, which of course Jane Austen hated because she had been in 2 of them, which were horrible, right? And there was something else, but I can't remember. There were 2. Oh, I think being tutors or, coming into homes and teaching young girls about art. I think those were the only 2 jobs that you could actually ever get. You couldn't just walk out and get a job.
and I think when push comes to shove, Fanny did stand up by saying no to Henry. Like, I think that's the bravest thing that a heroine did in any
Absolutely.
of the novels,
Yes.
for her to say no.
I also think even from a 21st century perspective, we have that attitude towards women sometimes. If you're looking at Fanny from the perspective of essentially being an abuse victim most of her life, she's constantly subjected to emotional abuse from half the family members around her. And I think we still sometimes have that attitude towards, oh, why didn't she just leave? Kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Added woman syndrome.
Yeah, and if you look at Fanny as well, like, I see her as a disabled character in a lot of ways. Like, she's always feeling sick, she's always feeling ill, she's always weak. She doesn't have a lot of energy to stand up for herself, and saying that she's just not good because she's passive when she's using all her energy to stay, sane and safe and alive,
I think the beauty
There's a lot of strength.
I think the beauty of the book is that you see her grow, and you see her get to a point where she does stand up for herself. It takes all of that experience for her. And she's smart. She understands that marrying Henry Crawford is a really bad idea. And she does stand up for herself when it comes to Henry. So I think that's how Austen likes to create her characters. They don't stay the same throughout the story.
She stands up to Mr. Bertram as well.
But she does. She does.
And Edmund, she stands up to Edmund, which is the most moving moment.
That's true.
Yeah, you were talking about the adaptations, And I didn't feel like any of the adaptations made, and I can't remember the two characters, the brother and the sister, the ones that came to town, Henry's sister and him, right?
Mary.
Mary and
Mary.
Henry.
I didn't think any of the adaptations made them as bad as I thought they were. I just thought they were just such bad news from the beginning.
In the 1999 one, she shows her ankle intentionally in the drawing room. She might as well have just like taken her top off.
Yeah, and she's smoking when they're playing billiards. I thought that one that they were like appropriately bad.
I didn't like any of the two I've seen. And the one where she's blonde and running around like a tomboy, that didn't seem like her at all.
That was horrible.
And the other one got a little too political about the West Indies partly, but also I didn't think she acted like I would expect her to from the book in that one either, because she didn't start out quite as subdued and so on. So I didn't like either one. I'd like to see somebody make one like I like, but I'm not going to direct it. So
It needs to be a miniseries. It's one of Jane's longest books. They're not going to be able to do it in a movie.
Yeah.
So and I don't think they've quite done Emma justice by a movie. That's why I think the Ramona Gray and Jonathan Miller miniseries is the best, because it's given the time to develop the characters in the story. So Mansfield Park is in that same area where it's got to be done in a miniseries.
There is one from the 1980s. It's quite good.
That's what I was going to say. The one from
yes,
83 is fairly close to the book. And I think the two leads who are playing Edmund and Fanny are good. The person who's playing Henry, like, I don't know if it was the costuming or something, but in the 83 version, he just seemed like laughable. Every time I saw him, I just wanted to laugh at him. But anyway.
The gal that played Fanny, I thought she was right on target.
Yeah.
Of course, the best version of Mansfield Park with the best cast is on radio. Tennant, Cumberbatch, Felicity Jones, and the narrator is Amanda Root on radio. That's Mansfield Park luck to its fullest. Radio.
Do you know like where people could get a hold of that, Kirk?
I think they sell it as a package of BBC radios. Many of the BBC radio versions are entertaining.
Okay.
And so I think it's in a package. It is on Audible. I re-listened to it a couple months ago. Every time Amanda Root was on, wait, that's Amanda Root.
How about Emma? We've talked a lot about Fanny. How about Emma? Oh, thank you, Joan. Joan put it in the chat.
Excuse me.
I know there's a few more Emma fans who registered. So
I
want to stand up for Emma.
I was going to say that my husband does not read Jane Austen books, but he will watch all the movies with me more than once. So that's a good thing. But from the movies, at least, he thinks Emma acts too spoiled and he doesn't like her very much. And of course, I like her, and my daughter and even my grandson all like her and think the whole book is very amusing and so on. But she is young, and of course she has to grow and learn too, like everybody else.
I thought interesting a couple comments in the history of Fanny Wars. One was, and I didn't write the name of the person, not for all of these, but said that Emma was becoming Highbury's own Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And another person said that Oh, Mrs. Elton is Emma's evil twin.
Yeah, that was in the Elaine Bander article.
Yeah.
So Stuart Tave originally called her Emma's evil twin. And yeah, I think that shows, that like you think Emma's bad, and then Mrs. Elton shows up and you're like, oh no, this
Yeah.
is bad.
This is bad.
But you have to wonder too with Emma what the future held for Jane Austen if she would have lived, because that, to me, the book Emma tells me that's a considerable divergent from her other novels, and I suspect that she had other ideas for novels along the same lines as Emma. To me, Emma is where her genius and brilliancy came out. Now, Pride and Prejudice is still my favorite novel, and Elizabeth Bennet's my favorite character. But Emma, this is, I think, where Jane Austen's brilliancy and genius has really started to come out.
Yeah, what's interesting about Emma is like it seems like it was purposely written that it has to be reread. It's like you just don't appreciate it the first reading.
Yes.
And I know my first reading, I hated Emma and thought she was, as Elaine Bander said, terribly bossy pants, which is the funniest thing I've ever read in a Jasna article. But so, it's like, but as you reread it and you kind of realize like how much she has to deal with in coping with her father, and how she's so kind always to her father, that really kind of changed. And over time, the book became my favorite, and she became my favorite character, my favorite heroine.
And many of us don't have the experience of being such a big fish in such a small pond at such a young age.
Yeah.
We don't. So I hate the comparison with Lady Catherine, because as you were saying, I think Chuck was saying, about she does all these good things with her father, and also her meddling isn't to make her this, that, it's to help people. Now she does it in the wrong way, blah 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 blah, but she is trying to help people. So even the wrong way. And Jane Austen's brilliant. The one chapter where Emma doesn't appear, chapter 4 or 5, with Mr. Knightley and Mrs. Weston talking about Emma and talking about her good qualities. And
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read some things where they were talking about how everybody should love Emma because she was this like oppressed caregiver of her father, which I thought some of that was sort of overblown because they had a house full of servants, even though you don't actually see them in the main action, but their whole lives is based on the existence of all these servants that are really taking care of her father. I mean, she's not a sole caregiver is what I'm saying.
She's doing the emotional labor. You know how they
Yeah.
talk about women doing emotional labor.
Right.
She's doing the emotional labor.
Right.
There's a Richard Jenkins book called I think it's 2 Bits, 2 Inches of Ivory or something, where he has a chapter that's called The Prisoner of Hartfield. And he basically argues that Emma is a prisoner of, she doesn't think she can marry. She doesn't think she can have a life. She's never really left Highbury because of her father. And, she is pampered and privileged, but she is also very constricted and confined.
I mean, maybe that's intentional on Austen's part because, as you noted in the quote, in the questions, she has the most money and status of all of Austen's heroines, but also she doesn't have a lot of freedom, and she is trapped in what maybe is Austen trying to say about the role of women, that in theory she should have all of this freedom and power, but she is the big fish in a small pond. She has power only in a very small space.
I reread Emma again here about a month or so ago, and I still can't figure out, and I believe I've asked this before, but I'm sure somebody gave me an answer. But where does Emma live when she marries Mr. Knightley? What's her home? Is it Knightley's home, or is it
It's Emma's home.
He
It is.
agrees to move
They
in
move
with
in
her.
together at Emma's home.
well, initially he does that. He moves in just, because of her father. But once her father passes away, is that where they live?
don't
Hartfield,
know.
is that their home?
We don't know.
Family
we don't-
lore is that Mr. Woodhouse lives for 2 years and then they moved to Donwell Abbey.
Okay.
And like that's sort of how the family lore is passed down, that they were 2 years before they could go to Donwell Abbey.
Yeah, and I thought that her sister would get Hartfield once the father died. Is that correct? Isabella, wouldn't she get Hartfield?
Well, some of what I've seen said that probably they would both inherit.
Mm.
I don't know how that would work, but
Okay.
Or would it go to Isabella's son?
yeah,
I don't.
Well, in the book, Emma is worried about Mr. Knightley marrying,
Mhm.
because then Isabella's son would not get Donwell, I guess. So
Mhm.
But the book also, when they're talking about their marriage, the book talks about that they should move to Donwell and therefore leave Hartfield.
right, yeah,
Bella
exactly.
and John Knightley.
And I think Emma finally resolved herself to that idea. So maybe Isabella's son will get Hartfield.
But the fact that she's kind of dependent on not feeling like she has any ability to move out, and that it's notable that Knightley agrees to move in with her, because men back then didn't do that. The wife went with the guy. It wasn't the other way around. And I think that kind of speaks to what we were saying about kind of her being a bit trapped, even though she has that privilege.
Going back to our few times ago when we had the talk about the proposals and so on, I think Emma's love story is one of my favorites, where she's really, and Knightley has said she should be in doubt as to whether someone loves her, and I just think that the ending when she realizes that she loves Knightley and so on is one of my favorite love stories in all of Jane Austen's.
yeah, I think the age difference in that time period wouldn't be considered that unusual. Whereas I think a lot of people today are like, ew, he's so much older.
How much older is he?
16 years.
I think if it wasn't for the line about him holding her as a baby, I wouldn't think about it as much.
That kind of does it for you, right?
Yeah,
Is that in the novel or just in one of the adaptations?
pretty sure it's from the novel, isn't it?
Well, in the novel, he says, I've been in love with you since you were 13.
13.
But I don't think it
Also
was
creepy.
like a sexual love. I think it was like, I love you as you're lovable. I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't see the story as a love story. I just didn't see love developing until the very end, when there was danger of Mr. Knightley marrying Harriet, or at least the thought of it. But throughout the novel, I thought it was just two friends, basically a brother and sister. I didn't see a development of compassion between either of them throughout the novel till the very end.
You
Right?
see
No,
hints of it,
I
hints of
think
it
his
at the ball.
His compassion for her is pretty obvious throughout the novel. I just think she's
As a sister.
oblivious.
As a
Hmm?
sister. You could say that his
Uh,
compassion for her
I
was
don't
as a
know.
sister.
No, I didn't feel that way. I don't know. I didn't.
I think maybe when Frank Churchill gets involved, he starts realizing he's jealous, and it's like,
Yeah. That,
hang on.
yeah, that's when you can start seeing like little cues that he's, even in the second volume, like when people are talking about whether he likes Jane Fairfax, and he says, "Oh, I don't think my admiration of Jane Fairfax will ever take me by surprise." And I think like the unspoken line there is, "But my admiration for you did take me by surprise."
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's right. And also Emma's concern about Mrs. Weston suggesting Knightley likes Jane Fairfax. So yeah, sure, I could see those subtles.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think at the Crown Ball is when Emma really starts noticing like, oh, he's kind of sexy. It's not the word she uses, but I think that's the thought she has.
I like that line, brother and sister. No, something
indeed.
like that.
Until she was 13 anyway.
How about like the question?
And then we get to the
Harriet?
cousins.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just joking. And then we get to the cousins on the other side of this conversation.
I got one point that I got to make, and it was in the history of Fanny. Stephen Gwynn, he contends that Jane Austen is not a satirist. I'm not sure I understand that. I think she is a satirist or a satirist, depending on what country you're from. Right? I mean, especially in Pride and Prejudice. I mean, there's just one-liners in there, chapter after chapter, if not from Mr. Bennet, from Lizzie, even Mr. Darcy.
Yeah.
Sometimes the nuances of the terms that like literary critics use about like irony versus satire versus parody, sometimes the nuances of that is lost on me. Certainly she's full of irony. Yeah, I'm not sure why they're saying that person is saying that she's not.
Yeah, I don't get it. So that was somebody, I think Stephen Gwynn is from the late 19th century.
Because even Emma's attitudes about class are a kind of satire of those attitudes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't make you hate her, or they don't make me hate her. They just make you see how people thought about class. And somebody pointed out that everybody thinks that there's a different class right below them, right?
Yeah.
Like Mr. Elton thinks that he belongs with the Emma class, and everybody below them is just, not really part of it. But Emma has a very different line where she cuts off the class thing to exclude Mr. Elton.
Because he was in trade.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I always thought Emma and Mr. Darcy would have made a great married couple.
Could be.
If you wanted there to be constant fighting, I think.
They would
The
make each
immovable
other
object
lose.
meets the irresistible force. Ooh. No one should write that. Chuck, please write that. I'll join the subscription. Which reminds me, on the Fanny novels, or the description of Fanny article, I noticed that was written in 2014. Since then, Fanny's actually got some love in the young adult area. So she has gotten some love, not as much love as Mary Bennett has gotten. Thank goodness. Yay, Mary Bennett. But Fanny's got some love in the YA zone.
Yeah. It just seems like probably there's a whole lot of fan fiction since that point, or just, continuations of the stories.
What are you doing?
Any thoughts about my question about Harriet? Like whether Harriet was really, in the end, was there anything good about Harriet, like having a whole year to realize that, nope, Robert Martin is actually the person I want to marry? I mean, she was 17 when she first started, so that's pretty young.
If you remove Harriet from the story, so there's more of, like, one of the articles was commenting that not a lot happens, more nothing happens. But if you remove Harriet, would it at all change the outcome?
Well, I would think that
Definitely.
Emma's, getting into Harriet's affairs and whatnot, certainly, especially toward the end, made her realize. I think Harriet was crucial to Emma's transformation,
Yes.
because it really made her realize, as the novel progressed, that she was frequently wrong about relationships.
And there are consequences to moving people around that you never would expect, i.e. Harriet being interested at the end in Mr. Knightley. Emma would have never guessed that. Well, you created this Frankenstein and now you pay the price.
And there's also a crucial scene there between Emma and Harriet where Harriet is saying that she's in love with Mr. Knightley, and Emma restrains herself to keep herself from hurting Harriet. It shows a kind of kindness or self-awareness or empathy that you haven't seen before. So I don't know if you didn't have Harriet. I understand the point. It's kind of like a side story, but in a way, it adds so much to have that crucial scene where Emma doesn't crush her. She doesn't crush her feelings and say, "How dare you think that Mr. Knightley could ever consider loving you?" She doesn't do that. She pulls herself back, even though she does not want to.
And you're mentioning overall that, this is an education for Harriet that she would have never, ever gotten anywhere else. And so when she and Mr. Martin, have their own parish and the Reverend is full of himself, she can stand up, or, she can say, I've dealt with an Elton, so I can deal with you too. So I think she's grown.
So the question is when the Martins invite the Knightleys to dinner at the farmhouse, is Mr. Knightley the only one going to attend? Will Emma stay at home?
No, she's learned.
They wouldn't invite him,
I don't think
though.
they would. I don't think they would invite them.
No.
I think that it's so
Yeah.
clear that their social order of things is so clear.
Yeah, and yet Mr. Knightley's demeanor, I can see him going there.
I can too. And I can see Emma going as well after.
Well,
at the end of
because
the
Mr.
novel.
Knightley's going.
They would go as in a formal situation with like a dinner. I disagree with you there.
Yeah.
I think even Mr. Knightley, because Mr. Knightley says it, you're trying to put Harriet above her station.
But he actually realizes over the course of the novel, he sort of realizes that Harriet has a merit that he didn't see in the beginning. And he has so much respect for, what's the guy's name?
Robert.
Robert Martin.
Robert. Yeah, he has so much respect for Robert, I think.
Yeah, he specifically says, "I am changed also." When she says she's changed her opinion of Robert, he specifically says, "I am changed also," and think that Harriet has these good qualities.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's kind of that bit at the end when it turns out that Harriet's biological father was actually just someone in trade and not a
He's
gentleman.
not a
and
gentleman. Like
it's kind of
Emma
like
was.
this bit about how she sort of like just kind of gives her the fade a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is it's like it's a lot, it's another one of those things where it makes a lot more sense in the social context of the time, and it's a little bit harder kind of in a modern context to go like, oh, that kind of sucks. But it was
like
just sort of how
legally,
things were
someone
at the
who
time.
isn't acknowledged is a bastard. Legally, they have like no
rights.
no rights, no anything. They can't inherit. It's
Right.
So I think the dad does give her some, like gives her some money when she gets married and stuff, which is nice of him.
yes.
Well, he did pay for her schooling at Mrs. Goddard's school.
Yeah,
as
that too.
well. But yeah, it's interesting that they're always kind to Mrs. and Miss Bates, because we're talking about class. But Emma's father is always kind to Miss Bates. He always sends them food. Is it a kindness to them, or is it out of a sort of a sense of social obligation?
Well, wasn't
They
wasn't
used to be
Mrs.
the same
Bates-
class.
Yeah,
at
exactly. That's what I was
one
gonna say.
point.
Wasn't Mrs. Bates' status much higher before?
Yes.
Yeah.
At one point, and then they lost all their money. So
Right.
they were,
So they're still that class. They're just
Mm.
economically very poor. I mean, just like Jane Austen's mother and she and her sister were still, sort of what they call pseudo gentry. But
Right.
when their father died, they became much poorer, but they still had the same class position as before his death.
I think somebody like Miss Bates could have less money than Robert, but the status, the class still remains the same, even though the actual money they have is, the other way around. I think that would be the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a thought about
So go ahead. Sorry.
the third question. You were talking about the couples and whether couples make each other better or worse. But the thing that I don't know that we've noticed in the other bit, Emma and Fanny are two of the most disliked of Austen's characters, and both of them end up in relationships with someone who was a mentor / father figure. I have no idea why that is. Does anyone have any ideas around why these both potentially disliked characters end up in relationships with men who have in some way parented them?
Don't know I necessarily agree about Fanny and Edmund and it being a parental role. Like it's a bit of a sibling role,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't really call it parental.
Yeah.
Necessarily, but it's still that like it's a bit of more family dynamic at first and then it changes into something else.
But there is a lot about how much he teaches her about different things, isn't there? There is that kind of aspect to it where I think he goes away to school and then he comes back and he sort of teaches her this, that, and the other. So, but I don't know. I don't know whether you would call that sibling or parental. I don't know. But there's a lot of that.
Yeah, and weren't Henry and James somewhat like about 10 years older than Jane, 8 to 10 years older? To play pseudo psychologist. Her
What
first
now?
is that
Say that again.
her brothers Henry and James were 8, 10 years older than her as her first literary mentors in a way. Obviously Cassandra, she's a lot closer to Cassandra, but so if we're playing psychiatrist there, that sort of relates to it. I view Edmund and Mr. Knightley as brother-ish figures, not parental figures. but you can.
Jane secretly wanted to marry her brothers. Is that what you're saying?
No. No. Use them as mentors. Well, certainly not James. No one wants to marry James. Henry, though, I don't know, that relationship is a lot closer and a lot more difficult.
It wasn't her brother the one that really provided her with the economic security to actually write, because he had that little house that he finally put Jane and her mother and her
Edmund.
sister in, right?
That was Edward, though. That
Edward,
was
yeah,
Edward.
who was the
Edward.
literary mentor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, at least as an adult, like her relationship with Henry seemed like he was like her sort of business manager type thing. But it seemed like she kind of like had a sort of almost like he was a bit of a cad, I think, or a playboy type or something, maybe, that, you know, she definitely would make comments to Cassandra about like, oh, what a Henry, or, you know, that he was just a bit much sometimes.
Getting back to the older brother thing, our two children are quite a long distance apart. The older one is a brother. There's a real admiration and sort of a patronage that grows up between two children like that. There isn't a sibling rivalry. They're not competing for anything. One has a lot of privilege and the other one has a lot of youngest child privilege. So anyway, I can see what Kirk was saying and agree that it was a brother fondness that developed into something else, because they weren't brothers. The brother and sister, anyway.
It seemed like Mr. Knightley had, like, I feel like his journey in the book was that he had to stop like trying to be the teacher, and he had to become kind of more empathic with what Emma went through dealing with her father, and that it was, you know, I don't even know that he was trying to be her father so much as like just like, yeah, kind of her teacher, and he had to give that role up. And I think the first place where he really specifically says he's going to give it up is at the ball, when he says, you know, I'm not going to tell you what's right. I'm not going to tell you what's wrong. And, you know, she says, oh, can you trust me to my vain spirit? But yeah, he has to give that up. He has to give up the lecture. And I think that's why the book continues beyond the like declaration of love, because you have to see that, like, oh wait, he's being much kinder to her now. And he's not like trying to, like, when he reads Frank's letter, he's not trying to say, oh yeah, you were awful at Box Hill. So he really, you know, you really do get to see that he changed. And I do feel like, even though he's older, that they will have a marriage of equality, because he's not trying to tell her what to do anymore.
I think one thing too is that even though Emma was very rude to
No one
Miss
else.
Bates, but all the time she was doing kind things for Miss Bates. She would bring them things that they needed and would visit them, sometimes reluctantly, but she was actually, and I think that Mr. Knightley finally realized that too.
Yeah, I think he had such, I think, high expectations of her that maybe, yeah, like she did do lots of things well, and she did treat lots of people, you know, like her father almost all the time well, Mrs. Weston well, Mr. Weston well. So yeah, being able to like kind of understand, like, oh yeah, she's got all these positive qualities.
So I think the highlight between the two characters, that Emma is trying to be good and generally kind of being a little bit of a bitch, might be going a bit far, bit bad, trying to be good, whereas Fanny is really very consistently, I am so well behaved, I am following all of the rules, I'm very, very good. And that might be one of the reasons that people dislike Fanny so much, because she is just so good. She does have little dark patches. Like if you read closely, you notice bits where she thinks horrible thoughts about people, but she kicks herself for them immediately. And she's trying to be, no, I'm good. I'm so, so good. I'm very, very good. And I think that's why people dislike her, because she's too good.
It's her way of surviving.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's right. I mean, if you think about all the horrible things that family did to her, and she couldn't yell and scream and say, what a horrible person you are. She just had to take it. And so I think probably what you do with that, I mean, I think that's probably why she was so sickly. But the other thing you do with that is you try to convince yourself somehow that the submission that you don't have any choice about is a choice because you're a good person, maybe. I don't know. I just think it really warps somebody to live in a situation in which they are totally dependent on people who treat them horribly.
Definitely.
Except Mrs. Bertram.
Except Mrs.
Well.
Bertram. I forgot
Just
who that
makes
is.
Fanny do all the work for her.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. She was the sickly one.
Or the
She
drug
sends the
addict,
maid. She
depending
just
on the
sends
movie.
the maid.
Remember
was
in 99, I think, wasn't she the drug addict in that movie?
Yes.
Kept taking her laudanum drops and falling
Taking her
asleep.
laudanum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking about Emma and Fanny's choice for a husband, and I was thinking that they love them, but they didn't have that many choices of men. It's not like they went out
right.
and, you know, met a lot of guys, and even though they did love them, I felt it was sort of a default, you know, position because there wasn't more choices out there for them.
I think that's right. Doesn't somebody say that at some point during the novel? Something like, you've really not known. Oh, I think it's the father who says it to Fanny. You really haven't known any men before. How could you reject Henry when you haven't even known anybody else?
And she's like, and he goes, oh.
I know Henry's a bad case.
Also, I was thinking about Mrs. Weston, and I know in the film adaptation, I don't know whether she was doing reverse psychology, but I felt perhaps that she was being like in a way, some sort of a matchmaker by saying to Emma, oh, I think Mr. Knightley likes Jane Fairfax. I don't know whether she was trying to create jealousy in Emma so that she would wake up and realize that, oh, I do like him, or, you know, yeah. I'm not sure about that.
I think it's believable because she seems to know Emma so well that it seems unlikely that she would not have been able to see that Emma really was in love with him.
Right.
But in the book, they set it up that Mr. and Mrs. Weston want Frank and Emma to get together.
Oh, true.
And she's totally like shocked when Emma tells her that
that's right. That's right.
True.
I'd forgotten that. That's right.
Right. That's true. I
Uh,
also,
this-
I'm sorry.
To
I
Francis, you, she gets, Fanny has a little jealousy of Mary, but she needs a little more jealousy of Mary, maybe for people to react to or to say that she has something in there. I was mentioning the YA Fanny. YA Fanny does little things like, she'll talk under her breath, or she'll do little rebellions. So that where the modern authors are giving her just a little bit more, so you can sort of empathize.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think like if you read just Fanny's thoughts, like part of it is she doesn't feel like she can love Edmund because of her sort of sense of her class. That she feels like she's from a lower class than Edmund is, and that I think there's at some point where she says, it would be madness to love him, but like, why do I keep having this feeling? I think that inner struggle that she has of like, this is what my heart is saying, but I don't think I can, there's no way in which it can ever really happen, but my heart is saying that I love him. I think that's like just a fascinating psychology in Mansfield Park.
But
there's something-
Tom is the heir, not Edmund. So Edmund's career is as a clergyman. So is that really that much above, say, Fanny? I mean, I suppose as a class society, it probably is, but still you would think there would be some hope there for Fanny.
Well, I think because the father is a baronet and Fanny's father is like a drunk in the Marines, that they're totally different classes.
Yeah, but
Do you think until Fanny actually goes back and sees her family as an adult, I guess, do you think she actually realizes? I don't think she does. I don't think she realizes quite how awful they are until she goes back as an adult, because she left as a child, and I think she as well is kind of surprised at just how terrible they are.
Wasn't Fanny's mother of higher class? She was the daughter.
She was, yes, she was the sister of, what's her name?
Lady Bertram.
Yeah,
Right.
sister.
So
Dinosaurs.
that raises her class also.
Yeah.
No,
It
because the
does.
class would come from the father.
Father.
Oh,
It,
oh,
it doesn't matter what
Right.
and I think like the beginning of the book, it sort of makes it sound like Lady Bertram married up and Fanny's mother married down,
Yes.
and maybe Mrs. Norris married equal. But yeah, Fanny's class would
That's
come
right.
from her mother, her
Yeah.
father, not her mother.
Also, Fanny wasn't so weak because she did refuse to participate in the play that they were all.
Yes. That's
and
right.
and there was a lot of peer pressure there, and
Yes.
she was able to stand up for herself and say that she doesn't want to participate.
But
That's
she
right.
did participate eventually.
She did.
Yes,
She
yes,
did.
Because of Edmund.
yes.
Yeah.
Because Edmund asked her, yes.
Yeah.
But also,
Darn you, Edmund.
I think it's hard for us to realize how theatricals were so scandalous, at near the beginning of the book, when this whole theatrical scheme is coming up, she keeps resisting, and you think it's because of her temperament. She's too shy. She would never be able to perform or put herself out there. She can barely speak up. And so I was just thinking, as I read along, that it was because of her personality. Later, you find out that she does have strong standards for behavior, and she was thinking, of her uncle. You get that impression as well. So I really admire Fanny because she resisted Henry's turnabout. To me, he looked like a reformed character. And she didn't know a lot of men. You know, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
She didn't have any experience of men that weren't her cousins, or practically anyway, and or the gardener. Anyway, she has a firmness there that comes, I think, to surprise one. And I think that's very commendable.
So the best of Mansfield Park is not when Fanny's row is the least.
When Fanny's what?
Row is the least, when her part is the least.
That's all.
No.
That's awful. Marilyn Butler, boo, boo. I don't want to turn
What?
into political, but boo for Marion Butler. The
That was one of the comments from the Fanny Wars article.
Yeah.
The best
feel
is when
so
Fanny
unprepared.
when Fanny stands up to Edmund after standing up to Sir Thomas.
That's right. Yeah.
I think she's like the only consistent one in the entire novel. In some
Yeah,
ways,
The question
she
that I
stays
asked
the
about,
same
is
the
she
whole
ever
novel?
wrong?
like Mrs. Norris says, "Oh yeah, I'm volunteering to help with Fanny," and then kind of ditches any responsibility except yelling at her. And Edmund says, "No, no, no, I'm not going to be in the play," and then he agrees to be in the play. And Mary Crawford says, "I'm never gonna want to marry a clergyman," and then she gets tempted to marry Edmund, and just everyone is changing their mind and being morally inconsistent in the entire book, and Fanny is the only one who isn't. And
That's
I
a
think
good point.
in some ways that plays to her
No,
advantage if you're acknowledging that as a strength, but I think
Yeah,
I
she
never
seems
really,
to be
I
the
never
moral
really
center.
understood why people didn't relate to her. I just didn't understand that, truthfully.
I actually like the fact that she stood by her moral character and where she got it from the family she came from, but she had that moral character and she kept it. And I really admired her from the first time I read it when I was quite young. I thought, well, this is a good example. But the reason she's my least favorite is just because she seemed awful mousy. And I understand why, and I like her even so, but I do admire the fact she's got this strong moral fiber, a little bit like Jane Eyre.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder because Austen puts in the consideration, like the father in Mansfield Park questions himself about how his own daughters were raised, why they came out that way. And then you're like, the question you're raising is, how did Fanny get this rock solid moral core that nobody else seems to have? It's fascinating. And it leads you back to a kind of a character that is not totally environmental. I don't know.
She reminds me of Anne Elliot because they both have horrible families, and yet they seem to be good-natured girls who are somewhat quiet, repressed, but occasionally do speak up when needed, and they both ended up with pretty good guys.
Yes, but Anne Elliot is a bit more more of a sympathetic character, I think, than Fanny.
I don't.
For some reason, Fanny grows on you as you read the book.
Mhm.
But I think Anne Elliot, you have sympathy for her right away. I mean, I don't think she's very likable. With Fanny is.
Yes, I mean,
mousy.
I like her better than Fanny, but I'm not sure why. I just.
Well, Fanny, being somewhat subdued has a large part to do with Mrs. Norris, her constant,
Right.
Just beating her up basically verbally.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also think like Fanny's, like the mental kind of like how much of her thought process Austen shows you, I think is really neat. And I think that it does change over the course of the novel. Like, so like she does have this struggle about her feelings, but then I think at the end, like she is able to own that she has those real feelings. I think that's where I see the humanity of her, is that struggle of, you know, I have these feelings and what am I going to do with it?
Yeah,
It-
she
is her-
grows as a character. As she grows, you grow with her, and you grow with her experience. I agree with you, and I think that, you know, she cuts out of that little perfect stamp that she's in.
But is her struggle to me seems to be more what's right and what's not right, more than it is what I feel and what I don't feel. I mean, the struggle on her part is, am I doing what's right? Because even with Henry, the struggle is, what do I owe other people? What do I owe? Not so much do I love Henry, but what do I owe this family that has raised me? Should I marry him because to kind of fulfill some kind of obligation to them?
Well, yeah, but she does make the ultimate decision, and she stands by her initial thought that marrying Henry would not be a good idea.
Right.
So I think that's, you know, you see her growing in her, what's the word I'm looking for? That she's really more sure about herself and how she feels.
Yeah.
I think she's
Well-
also wrong in some of her like reactions are very young, you know, like when she finds out about Henry and Mariah running off, her reaction is that, you know, the family should be annihilated, that they should all be blown up, that's the best way of dealing with it. So it's like there are ways in which she's still an 18-year-old, and then there's ways in which she's very mature, but I don't think that she's never wrong. I mean, I think that she's flawed, and she's you know, struggles with emotions like the rest of us do.
Who amongst us hasn't wished for their entire family to just blow up when they're being embarrassing?
Exactly.
And you know, kind of like
Yes.
being happy that Edmund is miserable, like she's happy that he's not, you know, blind about Mary anymore, but you know, that's not like the most admirable quality to be happy. But it's understandable too.
But it is human. Yes, it is human.
Yeah.
And it's not like she does anything to bring it about, right? She just has a temporary satisfaction in it.
And poor Fanny has the most difficult rival of any Austen character. So not only is she in this bad situation, she gets Mary Crawford. Is that fair? Is that fair, Jane Austen? You know, as some said, sort of the darker coin of Elizabeth Bennet.
Right.
You know,
Elizabeth Bennet without the morals.
Yes, exactly. You know, Grace and I were talking earlier in our own Zoom. Yeah, Eleanor gets Lucy Steele. Lucy Steele. I mean, Lucy Steele has her abilities, but she's nowhere near Mary Crawford.
And how many critics have been seduced by Mary Crawford and think that Edmund should have ended up with her?
Absolutely.
I mean,
And how
Fanny
many
herself
men
is kind of seduced by
gone out with
Mary Crawford.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm
And how
just saying,
many
like,
males on this phone call have gone out with Mary Crawford?
Or married Mary Crawford.
Exactly.
ooh.
Exactly. See,
I think it's
what I was
also-
saying. I don't think any of these adaptations have made, somehow the adaptations want to make Mary Crawford and the brother seem kind of like understandable. But I don't think they are. I think they are a bad piece of work from the beginning. And I don't think there's any redemption for them. But I think the adaptations have tried to kind of make this like redemption for them, which I don't think there is.
I don't know. I think it's a little bit more complicated with Mary Crawford because, like, I think it would have been easy to have Mary be super catty to Fanny or Fanny hate her, but they don't really. It's the thing. Like, Mary actually like stands up for Fanny several times and is like really nice to her and totally
But why?
supports.
But that's the question. Why is she nice to her?
And she like totally supports Henry going for it, and like see Steele, Eleanor Dashwood thing, and there isn't really that dynamic, even though Mary is kind of a terrible person. We never get that really between them.
Well, Mary
think that's
sees Fanny
interesting.
as a prospective wife for her brother.
Mhm.
Maybe somebody who might rein in her brother.
Well, exactly. And so this is like viewing Fanny as a kind of sacrificial lamb for her brother. I don't think that's a good quality. I wouldn't trust Mary beyond I could see her. Would not for a minute.
Oh yeah, her true character is totally revealed in the end, where she basically blames Fanny for
Yeah.
the whole mess, but because she didn't
I
say
would ask her
yes,
to dance at a ball.
but
Sure you would.
but I think that becomes more interesting when you realize that she is that judgy and that awful, but she didn't initially to someone that she actually likes.
She what now?
It's still like how she's seductive and alluring to Edmund in a way that probably no one has ever been. It doesn't seem like Edmund has had much experience with women, according, sort of seems like that anyway.
Right.
So yeah, there's something very seductive about her. And I think like because he's attracted to her, he gives her all these good qualities that she doesn't have.
But Fanny kind of does it too, which is interesting.
I'm sorry, what?
I think Fanny does that to a degree too.
I think that's right.
At the
I think
beginning.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Gives Mary good qualities, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
They kind of delude themselves into attributing to her qualities she doesn't have because they are somehow attracted to her, and even Fanny is attracted to her.
Yeah.
I was wondering how Mary Crawford compares to somebody like Wickham, for instance. Wickham was very attractive and seemed nice to people.
Yes, he did. And they attributed good qualities to him, which he didn't have. That's right.
I definitely think there's a running trend in Austen's work where if someone is super charming, run.
Yes. And I think that's really true.
Like her
Mary
brother Henry. Like her brother Henry.
She does tell Edmund, like, to his face, like she doesn't understand why he wants to be a clergyman. She tells him being a clergyman is awful.
Right.
She tells him that he's lazy because he wants to be a clergyman. Like she's not telling Edmund just what he wants to hear. I mean, she's actually being honest in that. And Edmund is like, just like Fanny sees how awful she would be to marry Edmund, and Edmund can't see that because he doesn't listen.
Yeah, isn't that strange? That's unlike every man you've ever known, right?
Not only every man, but women who
every
date.
Woman. That's
and
right.
women, it's very, love is blind, and you don't want to see the faults of your dating partner.
That's absolutely right.
But she's more complex because like Wickham lies and tells you what you want to hear. She doesn't lie. I mean, she basically tells Edmund, yeah, I think what you're going to do with your life is a bunch of crap. And Edmund's like, she'll change.
But she, yeah, I agree. But she also thinks that she has power over him. It doesn't matter what she says. And in a way, she's right for a while. And she may have been right completely had it not been for Fanny. Or had it not been for her overplaying her hand, which she did.
All of Jane Austen's characters have characters that make you question them, because when you talk about Wickham and Mary Crawford being super nice and you want to run from them, you certainly wouldn't want to run from, say, Jane Bennet, for example, because she is super nice too. But, throughout these books, you never know, right until the story progresses, whether Jane really is super nice. And she is.
Francis
Be the
says
Jane
nice
Bennet.
versus charming. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, the novels are populated with couples where they married because of physical attraction, and, woe be to them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
The Bennets.
So, I think at a level like that probably was where the main attraction was for Edmund. I mean, Mary was witty also, but was pretty clear in saying like her opinions about, I mean, she would be the absolute worst clergyman's wife.
Oh God.
She'd be worse than Mrs. Elton, and that's
Yes.
the biggest insult I could give anyone.
Yes.
Ouch, ouch, ouch.
So
Yeah, I would disagree that Mary isn't wicked like Wickham, but she's worldly cynical. She says the London maximum, everything is gotten with money. So that's different than Wickham's outright evil, in my opinion. It's a different cynical world that won't play in a parish, as you were saying, where you have to be empathetic and you have to deal with folks who need your help in small and great ways, and not just financially.
yeah.
Well,
I don't feel like
I don't think she's saying, oh, well, you can buy everything with money, but I'm really good and I wouldn't if I could. I think she's saying you can buy everything with money and I would and I can. I don't see the saintly side of Mary.
She's got 20,000, so she can, in fact.
Exactly.
Well,
she never tries to understand Edmund's point of view. Like she just tells what she thinks, and she never like really tries to understand him, which
and
I think you have to have that for a successful marriage.
And all she does is look at Edmund as a potential marriage commodity. That's it. That's the only way she looks at Edmund. Is he a viable marriage commodity or is he not? Can she make him into one, or can she?
I think what's funny is like Edmund, he's written in the character as attractive, which isn't really highlighted in the book because that's not Fanny's perception of him, but I think it clearly is Mary's perception of him, that he's a good-looking man. And it is kind of funny because I think everyone thinks of Edmund as like so I don't know what the word is, but boring. But I think, really he's quite attractive. And so, of course, the Johnny Lee Miller version brings out that attractiveness. Even if it totally is not the same as the book, but but it is funny that, you know, Edmund is really attractive, but it's not like something that's really clear, I think, to readers. Like everyone thinks Edmund is Mr. Boring. It's like, yeah, he's actually pretty good looking though.
They should have jumped in a pond.
When
Well,
the older brother gets sick, that makes another attraction for Mary, because she thinks then she'll, you know, be inherit with.
right. Yeah. Edmund with money is different than Edmund. But even there, she's still prejudiced against him being a clergyman because, like, he can't have an Esquire after his name. And
Right.
it's like, who cares? Any parting thoughts?
Well, I guess what I was thinking of is that she cares because she doesn't care about him. She cares about him as a social commodity. You know, how appealing, attractive, or whatever he is as a social commodity. I don't think Mary cares about him at all.
I think
That's
she
entirely
does.
fair to her.
I think she.
You think it's unfair to her?
Yeah.
Well, because I think if she initially looks at Tom, and he does have all the social commodities that she wants. He is the heir. He is the charming one. You know, he is the one with all the friends who is always going off and partying and things like that. But she does end up falling for Edmund, even though he's actually the opposite of what she wants, and she tries to turn him into that, which is obviously messed up in its own way. But I think it's yeah, she's a complicated person.
Yeah, that's true. But you know, I think every person at that stage would want somebody who's a great social commodity and also who you can actually love. Or you could actually be attracted to, or is appealing or something. I don't know. Which Tom never was presented as being, right?
No.
Well, and
She
also
wanted-
like
she
Tom
wanted
doesn't
it
care.
all.
Doesn't care about her. So
No.
Anyway. Well, I have to tell you, I'm so happy that we had a congenial discussion, because I had visions of people screaming about how awful Fanny was and other people saying you're wrong. So thank you all for coming and being so, everyone was so pleasant. I think all the well, that I always expect that in our meetings, that people are going to be pleasant, but I had my anxiety of my Fanny anxiety that things would get out of hand. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Thanks for
and
hosting.
I was really hoping that it would be a happy talk, and it was. So yay.
It was.
All right, we'll try to think of another good topic for our next Zoom meeting. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.